I vaguely know who actual Fandom is. No.
But it's the most common question, and not without good reason, right? And so, like, the example that comes up all the time, like every 6 months, it made the round on Twitter for like the last decade. And probably not even that. Probably the spacing was like 2 months. But it was, you know, if I want to start with manga, well, I start with volume 1. And it was like, if I want to start with Batman, you know, and then there's this convoluted example of like, well, where the hell do I start? Right? It comes up all the time. To that point, I have several thoughts. But the first is actually that if you want to start with Batman comics, they're not wrong that there is not as clean of an origin start here, go to the finish, right, as the manga approach. That's for sure true. That said, you'd be very hard pressed to find me somebody new to comics with a genuine interest in starting who you couldn't hand 10 to 25 great Batman graphic novels to and say, oh, try this one and see how you like it. And they'd be thrilled with the experience and want more. Yeah. Like it'd be very hard to find somebody who does not have enough passing familiarity with Batman to, you know what I mean? Yeah. And wants to learn. So like, it's not that hard. It's like, oh my gosh, you want to read Batman? Amazing. I like reading Batman. Here are 20 of my favorites. Try one, see what you think. Right. And the other piece with manga that I have to say, listen, I'm not anti-manga. I've only started reading finally in the last like 2 years. So I'm finally uncovering some of my own biases and my
doing better than me. I'm resistant still.
There's nothing I had against it. It just like, I don't know. It's that there's this weird division mentally, and as if they're not both just comics, which absolutely they are. Yeah. They are. And my favorite that I've read in the last 2 years is Pluto by Urasawa. Oh my gosh, it's so good. Okay. But the one thing I want to say here is people often point to like One Piece as this incredibly compelling, you know, you can just start with volume 1 and you just keep going manga series. There is no comics challenge I find more intimidating than starting One Piece, which is what, like 250 volumes deep and counting. Like there's literally nothing. I would so much rather try to read Batman from day one,
right,
than try to catch up. Like I actually find that way more intimidating. I mean, so I feel like that gets
just start reading, right? You know, just start reading.
You do. I mean, but then you never stop until you're, you know, old and in the graves.
Yeah, it's and then that's why I've honestly been considering about getting into manga, just because I have to make that point constantly, because I get people showing up saying, well, you know, manga's outselling, it's actually destroying comics in sales, as if there's some competition between the two, as if you know, as if one doing well makes the other one not do well. And it's like, I'm happy for manga that it's doing so well.
It's a false equivalence kind of thing, and a weird divide when folks feel like choosing sides makes sense on the manga versus comics debate, as if manga wasn't a form of comics that just happens to originate outside of our known geography. Essentially is all it is for us in America, or, you know, whatever.
I mean, I have to assume at this point that if someone's making that claim, they kind of have a weird agenda behind it.
I've never. So you follow this stuff pretty closely, and I'm well aware of. Well, I shouldn't say I'm well aware. I am aware of the awful elements of comics fandom on YouTube, but I definitely don't follow and engage with it to the degree that you do. I try to call stuff out when I see it, but I don't try to see it. Definitely, right. You know, I don't want to make that a part of my day.
You're very, very smart man for that.
Thank you. So are folks on that side using a perceived barrier to superhero comics as like evidence of their failure, and that this is some sort of win? Like how does this get leveraged by the toxic elements of fandom?
I mean, so they will use any framing device that they can, that
Sure.
will work for them in the moment, basically. So yes, they'll use it in that way. And to me, you know, this is directly tied to, in a lot of cases, the you know, the reason I asked you on is like people pushing this idea that these are just basically, it's a dead medium. And you know, that's depending on if they want to be upfront about their real reasons for not liking it. There's a lot of narratives that just kind of get picked up by people that see them, especially in the toxic element areas online. They don't look for confirmation of anything in a lot of cases. So
Sure.
they see their favorite YouTuber or whatever saying this character's been replaced by a woke version or whatever that may mean. And they just run with it. It's bizarre to see people making claims that you just know are like objectively false, and they're like so confidently, you know, they're sure of it. But yeah, that's one of them that it's really the most common thing that I see is that when it comes to comics is, and I've traced it back to its source. Honestly, I won't, you know, name any names, but it's a former comic book professional that is the first person I saw making the claim that manga is doing so well because it doesn't have this stuff that, you know, Western superhero comics have now, and that it's actually dominating and it's destroying, and that's, you know, those types of false equivalencies.
So it seems to me that this all feeds an attempted narrative here, which is that comics are dying, right? So comics, as large swaths of the American audience understands them, meaning Marvel and DC generally, right, is these huge market, right? But that the medium is dying, and then there seems to be this weird undercurrent of, I think, the folks you're describing, where it's like only if those, as if this was some grand important thing and not comics, but it's like only if those systems fall can we begin our ascendance,
Right.
with our real comics.
Right.
I think that's generally so the barriers to entry becomes fodder in this comics are dying, which is every year sillier and sillier as sales escalate and escalate and escalate. And obviously like it doesn't, but that's the thing is like, if you're only focused in on the issues that Marvel and DC have, poor little Marvel and DC owned by Disney and Warner Bros, these poor little companies. If you're only focused on them, then I guess you can fixate more on like failures, as opposed to like if you're just looking at like comics as a medium and understanding that means YA graphic novels of tremendous diversity that are selling like flipping hotcakes, right, and that are growing exponentially. If you actually acknowledge
those,
if you actually take that context into account, then the comics are dying.
Well, I mean, the way I framed it before is like ever since the, you know, kind of that certain hashtag and group, whatever it is, you know, became a thing. Every year since then, the sales have gone up. So like almost you could make a better case that them existing somehow benefits, you know, comic sales.
Don't give them credit like that.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking maybe that would, you know, in a dream world, they'd be like, oh, we should just stop doing this then, but that's not going to happen.
The sort of like weaponizing manga success as if, like, it would make more sense if you also created manga and you were like, I am a part of this better thing, come join me, right? But that's not who's making the argument. Like that's what I find so incredibly weird about that particular element.
So a lot of at least some of the larger, more prominent figures in these areas, it's not, hell, I mean, one guy, the most prominent guy, he's gotten like one book out in 4 years. I think maybe he's finally about to get the second one out or something. It's a few years overdue, but like you should see the YouTube super chat money that he rakes in. You know what I mean? So like it's almost like
it's a profitable grift as these things go. Or at least it seems like maybe it can be. I'm always perplexed by the folks who like, it's like you pick comics for your grift. like you could have picked far more profitable enterprises than comics. Yeah. Okay. No, I guess I get that then in terms of the ways these ideas can be twisted. I don't know. It's all kind of bad faith stuff. I think if you're arguing, or if you encounter arguments from folks who are like, well, one of the reasons comics, or one of the reasons Marvel comics suck is because they're impossible to get into, right? And they're closing off new readers. That's probably from somebody who doesn't want to get into them. You know what I mean? So I'm definitely more interested and deal more regularly with the audiences who are actively seeking, how do I get into this?
Sure.
Of which I see thousands a day. You know what I mean? Not visually, thank goodness.
Right.
Be terrified. but like those people actually want to get in. They're asking the question because they want in. If you're hearing, no, there's such a barrier to entry, like that's from somebody who wants there to be a barrier to entry, essentially. Yeah. And I do want to, you know, again, I just want to underline, like, it's not like Marvel and DC couldn't learn from manga, right? Sure. There are things that they could learn from. It's not like they couldn't learn from what the YA market is doing, right? It's not like they are perfect. Like, let me be clear. There are barriers. There are problems. But I do think it depends who's doing the complaining and why they're doing it. You know what I mean? If it's from somebody who's like, I try to get into this, and just as I was getting into Deadpool, they canceled it, and then they relaunched it, and my comic shop didn't have it anymore, and I'm out. Like, that's a voice. I'm like, yeah, that sucks. You know, like, that's a bummer.
Well, I mean, then that gets into, not to defend it or anything, but I mean, it is important, I think, to consider the fact that like overhead is higher kind of thing on a Deadpool title than it is on, you know, just a lot of different manga titles, right? So like, if it's not selling well, then you kind of just can't afford to make it anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's definitely a thing that I've been looking into a little bit too. Cause like, it's like the success a book needs to have on the Marvel side in order to continue as an ongoing is a big thing right now. Because Marvel is increasingly sort of reducing the amount, like the ongoing book is a bit of a novelty. Yeah. Even though that's the history of the medium, right? There's just an increasing amount of limited series and sorts of things. But like the creator like Steve Orlando, who's writing Scarlet Witch right now, has tweeted pretty openly and honestly about like the margins on this book are razor thin. And that stuff I think is, if you're just like a casual fan and you're like Marvel owned by Disney publishing a book about an Avenger who had her own MCU show and was like the star arguably of Multiverse of Madness, that book is razor thin margins. Like conceptually, that's kind of hard,
right,
to reconcile.
It seems like there's a problem there that
yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to diminish that that's like a real challenge, and that as if like publishing print comics doesn't have a challenge, right? I'm not saying that, or I don't want to overstate like the idea that comics are dying is a way broad overstatement that I will argue against. The idea that publishing print Marvel comics and selling them is a really difficult business model. And the just what I've always said is like buying print comics doesn't make any sense to anyone anymore. Right. You know what I mean? Like it's not a sensible behavior.
It's kind of
maybe the weirdest thing I do.
Yeah, I mean, I only do it every once in a while now for like special occasions, special issues, but like it's very, very similar in a way to like it would be like saying the film industry is dying, right? Because movies aren't generally doing as well in theaters anymore, and so on, and like, but it's really just the distribution, the consumption habits are changing, and then you get you know, and these are the people that I deal with, these people that use those changing models, this changing consumption to grift, basically, you know, with people's ignorance, that they're not fully aware of the moving parts at play when it comes to these industries, and how they're changing. So it's really easy to go, well, it's because woke. Look at this, you know, woke. And yeah, I guess that's a career now. But
yeah, it's definitely the saddest, I think, career and position to take, where it's like just getting mad about, I don't know, attempts at marginally rectifying the absence of certain groups of people or certain sexualities across decades of story. We're talking slow, gradual progress, right? And making your whole deal getting mad about that, and seemingly then like just never enjoying anything.
Right.
And I'm far from, you know, I try to be very open and earnest about reactions, right? I will be critical of a thing if I don't enjoy it. I think there is a wrong-headedness to sort of, you know, there is toxic positivity too. Not everything is awesome all the time.
True.
I think things that aren't good are worth talking about. But just making your thing, like just being mad all the time, is so like, it just makes me sad for that person. But also it's, I don't know, it's just such a bummer at then too. It's like, and they're seemingly doing great and they're doing numbers like, and YouTube is, I mean, listen, we're here on YouTube and I spend time on here and obviously you do too. But it's just like, man, does this algorithm cater to hate? Like they love anger. And it's not just them, right? I think most social platforms do. But it sucks. It really sucks.
Yeah, I mean, even like, you know, I find myself having to I mean, I'll be honest, like I started out doing various types of content, not like I wasn't just strictly doing what I do now. This was part of it, but like over time, I would notice that covering this type of stuff that I cover was by far and away the most popular content, and I didn't have to, you know, I don't know, it just was. It kind of, it corrals you into it, right? And it's like, well, at least I can do something, you know, as long as I'm getting people saying that this is beneficial to them, what I do, then that's good. You know, and that's how I'll keep doing it. So
sure.
But yeah, I won't sit here and say that I haven't intentionally leaned into controversy because I know that that's what plays. But yeah.
Well, and I think there are healthy ways to do it. You know, I think as someone who also creates videos on occasion, increasingly rarely, you know, I just don't have the time or the skill set, frankly. But there are healthier ways to do it where you're like, okay, so for me, it was, when I did, it was like with X-Men, it was as the Krakoa era started and as House of X and Powers of 10 became massively, massively popular, I would hear from all these lapsed readers who were coming back because there are so many of them saying like, oh, wow, like the characters have gotten, you know, now I guess it would be so woke, right? Is what the, you know, whatever the buzzword would be. But a lot of it was around like, you know, like sexuality. And it was like, why do they have to be like this? They never used to be like this. To me, that was an opportunity to be like, okay, for some of you, you're actually surprised by this or confused or trying to learn. So let's engage with that question, because if we just take for granted that everyone should know the history of why that was, right? Or just like the history of sexuality in X-Men comics and the fact that there are decades of like subtextual references that queer communities understood.
Yep.
But guess what? I didn't.
I didn't either. I was just reading through this. There's an essay that I was reading through the other day. It was like, holy shit, this is like opening up this, you know, this whole new way of looking at stuff that I'm familiar with, right? But like I had never considered it this way. So yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, and I really value people telling them, they're like, oh, here's what I saw. And it's like, oh, that's fascinating. That's really interesting. So anyway, instead of taking that for granted, it's like, all right, let's actually try to write something and put it on paper. So I wrote this essay. It was, you know, sexuality in X-Men comics. And I made a video out of it. And it was, you know, to me, that was taking the quote unquote controversial topic, right, and actually engaging with it as best as I could, as earnestly as I could, from, again, a pretty limited perspective, right? So I was sourcing a lot of folks who are actually from these communities, because it's like I can't actually speak to the experience, but I can speak to the comics history. I can speak, you know, and part of this too is like, oh, the characters didn't used to be like this. And it's like, it's like the history of this is for decades, they weren't allowed. They were literally not allowed to have queer characters in their comics. Any character that could be considered that part of a queer community had to be all subtextual, had to be hidden. Sometimes it's like not even hidden that well, but it's like the characters couldn't just out and out say it until the big 1992 Alpha Flight North Star coming out as gay. And even then, it's not like it's suddenly opened this floodgate.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.